we'll see how we go. So thank you to the organising committee to slot me in on the last one. But also risk management is a subject or a topic that's normally left on the cutting room floor at the end of a strategic or enterprise strategic meeting. So I think it fits here at the last session of the day. So bear with me for about 25 minutes and plus some questions. I know I'm in between you, dinner, family time, or for some of us getting back to the desk. So we'll get stuck in. So as Lawrence mentioned, I'm the Global Sourcing Supply Chain and Sourcing Director for ECCO Shoes. I've been doing this for about 9 years. Everything I do in ECCO and everything I work for in ECCO has hints of risk management and tactics that we need to employ to mitigate risk for our company. ECCO is a vertically integrated company, so we own all our own manufacturing, we own all our own component making, and we own our own retail footprint as well in 88 countries. So we get something wrong in our supply chain, things can go south very, very quickly. So today, risk management, I'm going to try to conceptualize it a little bit in the helicopter first. We talk about sustainability, we talk about digitized workforces, we talk about digital platforms and footprints. Risk management goes right across all these things. It's very important though, because it's such a big topic, and I don't want to keep you here for a couple of hours to talk about it, and I could, don't worry. I'll come down into a procurement function or into a sourcing footprint to give you some practical examples of how we do things. I'm a practitioner, I'm not an academic, so you'll not see a lot of graphs and data here. These will be stories that will hopefully resonate with you so that you can take some of these learnings back into your own companies. Right, so let's get stuck in. The global pandemic, COVID, a massive event worldwide affecting every single corner of every single supply chain we have. If it did not put risk management on the map, then we don't know what would. But for me, risk management is very, very simple. And if you're willing and focused to put some time and resource into this, your enterprise can create measures and take things and put things in place that will help mitigate the plethora of disruptions that we can face. We have a lot of opinions and a lot of changes happening in organisations because of the disruptions that we've just faced. And we can fracture our supply chain in a moment's notice without warning. So what do we do about all this? Most of the time we see disruptions or events of disruptions because they affect profit or they affect our customer. But more and more now we're seeing that it affects employees, it affects our sustainability agenda, and affects many things. And supply chain is the epicenter of managing this risk. It's very, very easy to understand those disruptions and the risk after it's happened. We can map it with logic. We can go back and we can do a simple investigation to find out what went wrong and what we didn't have in place to help us mitigate the risk. The trick is, and I'm going to try to help you today, is to map that logic before the disruption happens, before the actual fact of the event. So let's see, I can get it down to bite size for you. I'll talk about a sourcing footprint. So also this morning we've talked about, I think every presentation today has talked about resiliency. Being a resilient supply chain, being a resilient company, being a resilient workforce. Who does not want to be resilient in this room, in their supply chain? Anyone? Who does not want to have a resilient enterprise, have a resilient supply chain, or be a resilient individual? Okay, no one? Anyone? Maybe I'm asking the wrong room, or it's very late in the day, I'm not sure. But I think I'm asking the wrong room. So to build our resiliency in our supply chain, we need to understand risk. We have to understand risk. We have to understand where these things come from. If we don't, you can't be resilient. I promise you, you cannot be. So I'm going to try to give you a thread here that might help you take away a thought or a mindset to break this down. In my company, in ECCO, in my position as the Global Supply Chain Director, I think of myself as an insurance broker when it comes to risk. And what my job is to create a policy for the company with the smallest premium possible to be able to help the company mitigate risk. So if you are a supply chain professional or you're in charge of setting up your network or setting up your sourcing footprint, think of yourself as an insurance broker. And that will help start to put things into context rather than trying to understand the whole academia of risk management. Marcius, you said I had a clicker, but I don't have a clicker. That's why I'm stalling. Anyone have a clicker? Or someone can just go to the next slide for me. We have to think on our feet. Thank you. So, where does risk come from? The risk of not having a clicker is one thing. We'll go back here. So where does risk come from? And it can be slightly different in different industries, in different geographies as well, but there are absolutely similar threads that flow through all of the risk the origins of the risks. I'll give you an example. In semiconductors, in the last year and a half, 2 years, has been extraordinarily disrupted. And this is not a geography disruption. This has disrupted industries across automotive, electronics, even healthcare, because we cannot get enough supply of semiconductors. But where does the disruption actually come from is very geographically, the origin is very geographical in the raw materials from very few countries, and they're restricting the supply. So even deep into the supply chain, right, of a very specific raw material is a disruption across multiple industries, across multiple geographies, across the world. So risk can come from many, many places. I guess in our front of our mind right now is that disruption or risk comes from things like pandemics or weather events, which, you know, we're in the typhoon season in this area of the world at the moment, or disruptions such as the Suez Canal, where a ship gets stuck for whatever reason. We still don't clearly know. The Ukraine war maybe not impact us directly here today, but it's impacting businesses that will impact on your supply chain somewhere in the value chain. And even this morning, I didn't have this in my notes, but the OTS mentioning terrorism, right, is very disruptive. But we can also get disruption from our competitors in the way that they go to market, omni-channeling, much better than us. We can't return a book to the store. It can come from our consumers pushing for sustainability when we don't have sustainability agendas, or switching their preferences of colour, price, or whatever. The biggest disruption or risk that we actually have in our supply chain a lot of the time is our own companies. And I'll try to explain a little bit more. The way we set up our company, the way we invest in our companies, the way we set our true north of our enterprise can create a very quick and dynamic shift in the way that we mitigate risk in our supply chain. Are we doing it for cost? Are we doing it for sustainability? Are we doing it to go into a new market? Are we doing it to reduce inventory? All these things can also come into how our risk works. To compartmentalize a little bit, this is it's not academic, but it is a source there that I like, because you can break it down. And as you come down from the enterprise into your supply contracts, essentially, you can actually start mapping risk each block or each step of the way. So today we will focus on the supplier risk management, or the sourcing footprint, or procurement. And that's where we're going to dig deeper into some practical examples, because if I try to look at the enterprise level, as I said, I could be here we'll be here tomorrow still, going on about it. Just one more thing that keeps me awake at night when I think about risk. It's not just your first tier or your 0 tier or first tier supply. It can be your second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh tier of supply that can create disruption that could be catastrophic to your company or your business. So what do you do about this? How far do you think, how deep do you think in your supply chain to understand risk? My concept, or my idea is, because I don't want to stay awake every single night, is to look at your CSR policy, or look at your ESG policy, and how far back do you measure in your supply chain to manage those CSR or ESG initiatives. If it's tier 1, then start with tier 1 on your risk management. If it's tier 2, then go down to tier 2. So that's an easy way to follow. So, supplier risk management could be your inventory supplier, it could be your facility management, it could be where you hold inventory, it could be your raw material, it could be many, many things. So anything that you sourced to sell to your customer. So, let's get into some practical examples. As I mentioned, we have to think now like an insurance broker. Is there any insurance salesman in the room? Just before I get started, so, well, we do. Some insurance companies down here. Okay, anything I say is from a supply chain perspective, not from an insurance perspective, but it's just to get your mindset up there. So, a good broker will know, or an insurance broker will know the environment that they work in. So where will the risk manifest? So in supply chain, we've discussed where the risk could come from. And then they'll offer you a premium to offset potential losses. So let's go through some examples. So how do we insure against these eventualities that will happen? So disruptions, external, normally associated with things like natural disasters, being exposed to external threats, could be governments, things that you can't control. All right? So if you have a supplier that has a very critical raw material that is positioned at the bottom of an active volcano, is this high risk or low risk for you to disrupt your supply chain? We consider probably a high risk. So your premium now will get higher to mitigate that risk, because you would have to set up another supplier that is in a less risk-adverse area. So maybe you haven't invested in that yet, and that's something that you would need to consider. The internal disruption could be things like when you source, where do you put the inventory? Do I need my own warehouse? Where's my warehouse situated? How far from the market? How far from the customer? Right? So these things internally, as well as also company culture. I think there was a topic on this earlier about employee engagement, and company culture can be very disruptive if they're not engaged. These guys also, if you have a disruption, maybe they don't want to work overtime anymore to help you fix it if they're not engaged. So company culture can also be disruptive if it's not good. So how do you promote good company culture internally? So these are things that you can control inside. Another one is the socioeconomic challenges. For this, it's labour costs, working conditions in certain countries that you supply from, you buy from. So these can shift very quickly. And if you're caught unaware, your price could go up very quickly. And then maybe you don't have the volume or the quantity that you can get your hands on. So another area that we need to consider when we look at the premium or the insurance policy that we're looking at. Then compliance, regulation changes. This is probably accelerated in the last few years. We had in ECCO, in our sole material, we source from a very large German company, but they manufacture in China. Last month or 2 months ago, the World Trade Organization put an embargo on a certain raw material that they consider a weapon of war that is used for the sole material production, or the raw material production of our sole material. So we are no longer allowed to export this material, our finished material, from China. And that policy came in 24 hours. So all my factories that need this material cannot have them now. So we had to go out and find another source. Luckily, we had that set up already because I'm very good at what I do. I don't know. So regulation changes, government changes, policy changes at a government or national level can also impact very, very fast. Trade barriers, a very, very significant one. Everyone has heard about the trade war between the US and China, but also trade compliance, commodity coding, HS coding can change overnight in various markets, various ports even in the same market can change or have a different interpretation. So whilst maybe the US and China trade war has been publicised in all the tabloids and business times, most of the trade compliance and barriers that we actually face day to day in our supply chain are not publicised at all. So you need to understand your trade compliances when you cross borders with any raw material. Another example here from ECCO. The EU is now tightening the policy on the sustainability or more virgin origin sourcing of rubber, and that we will no longer be able to import any recycled rubber into the EU. Any virgin rubber into the EU. It would have to have a recycled component. Now, we don't know how they're going to manage that. We don't know how they're going to measure that because we don't. Our shoes are HS coded very differently to a natural rubber product. But we wait and see. So trade barriers is another one. Another one's a little bit offbeat, but think about it when you're looking at your risk, is your competition. How are they going to market? How are they impacting your market? How are they going to your suppliers to get capacity stripped away from you? This is also a disruption that you need to start to think about as an insurance broker of your environment, what you operate in. Right. So we're going to need some things. We're going to need some tools to look at how we can look at our premium or our policy and what we set for ourselves. So thanks to Steph earlier today, if you're here, data. If you don't have data, go home. All right? You're not welcome here anymore. So you need visibility. You cannot make policy without data, without visibility, without something on the table that is semi-accurate, hopefully really accurate, but you need that visibility so you know where your potential disruptions will come from and how quickly you can react to mitigate that risk. Very, very important tool. It's not too late to start. Lots of digital providers here as well, so you should get around and start getting your visibility into your supply chain mapped. You're going to need investments. So to mitigate risk, you have to pay a premium. Your premium is your investment into a different way of doing things, a different way of doing sourcing in your supply chain. Where you purchase, maybe you're purchasing in a different geography. Your total cost of ownership of your purchase has now gone up. That's an investment, but you're mitigating for a future potential disruption. You're going to need commitments. And not just commitments to yourself to get up and make sure you think about risk in the morning. You're going to need board commitments, you're going to need enterprise commitments, and you're going to need commitments, I think he's gone now, but you mentioned Hypo this morning, the highest paid opinion in the room, right? You need to get in there first as an insurance broker and say, this is the commitment I need from the company to make sure that when this happens, or if this happens, we can do this and make sure our customer or our bottom line is not impacted. But we need to invest, and we need that commitment. So it's vital that you have the buy-in and the setup and clearly explain data to justify that investment and that commitment. The last thing we need is time. You can't do this overnight. But I was doing some research on risk from an academic point of view, and I came across a really interesting concept from the MIT Data Science Lab, which is they have two things called TTS and TTR. And you can go onto the MIT Data Science Lab website and you can read their work. It's very interesting. So it's time to survive and time to recover. So time to survive is when your supplier has enough inventory or capacity or manpower or whatever it is to be able to continue after the disruption. So it might be 3 days, it might be 5 days, it might be 3 months, it might be 6 months, depending on the industry or the commodity or whatever you're buying. The time to recover is after the incident or the disruptions happened, how quickly in time scale can they get back to recover fully? So in the semiconductor industry, the time to survive, very, very short. And the time to recover, very, very long. We're still recovering in total. So this is a very dangerous setup. And that's something that we can consider when you're looking at setting up your risk management profile. As I said, it's never too late to get started. We should look at risk management as something that we do inherently ingrained in what we do as professionals every day. But if you're not looking at it today, you should get started. Right, so we'll go down to some practical examples now. He's got the 10-minute card just about to hold up, so I've got to get on with it a bit. But I'll try to give you some examples. What I look at in ECCO when I look at my sourcing footprint, okay? So dependency mapping. I look at where I'm sourcing from. Am I globalized? Am I localized? And what I mean by that is, do I source material into our manufacturing settings from a long way away, or do I need to get it locally? Now, this is a bit difficult because I have 6 factories around the world that I need to supply, and I buy a lot of different materials, so I don't normally have a leverage with the supplier. But these are things I consider on all of our 240 odd materials that we purchase. Is it globalized or is it localized? I'll talk about this a bit more in the next slide. The matching of the values. Does your supplier or your source actually look at TTS and TTR? Do they look at your values on what you're doing in your supply chain and how they support you in that aspect, in your risk management? If not, are they the right one? I'll talk about partner selection a little bit later as well. And then origin versus destination. So if you do source locally, you don't really have to worry about logistics. Maybe in the Philippines a little bit worry about logistics, especially in the wet season. But normally when you're localized, the origin is very close to the destination that you require the material. But if not, you need to understand your logistics footprint. You need to understand your network map and where your points of disruption could come in there. So during COVID, again, we had massive freezes on international travel, both cargo and people. I'd argue actually if you knew that was going to happen beforehand, could you have done anything anyway in your companies to mitigate risk? I don't know. But let's go back to single versus multi-sourcing. I have 2 examples here I'll rush through. So single sourcing. I have 2 products here. I have a very famous waterproof material called Gore-Tex that goes into our shoes. And on the white shoe, I have a lace system, which is called BOA. Both of these are under extraordinarily high legal IP contracts, and I can only source from the company that supply that brand. So I have a very, very, very high constraint if something goes wrong on the shoes that I need to make. So what do? For Gore-Tex, for example, we hold a lot of inventory. So we spend a lot of cash to make sure we have a lot of inventory. We have a big TTS, a big time to survive in what we do. For the BOA lacing construction, we minimize the amount of SKUs that we build into the design of our shoes. So we don't have to hold a heap of inventory. We can hold very specific inventory that we know will consume season on season in our manufacturing process to avoid that risk. So that's how I mitigate some single sourcing problems. Ultimately, I would like to have some multi-source on those products, but that's tied up with a lot of IP and branding legal stuff. When I have multi-source, so these are our footbeds that go in pretty much every one of our shoes. These we can make anywhere in the world across, different geographies, we can make them internally in our own factories, we can make them externally with some of our partners. But if you over multi-source, you're also going to increase your investment and increase your premium that you're paying for your risk policy. And you'll get diminished leverage from this. So you need to find an optimal place between single and multiple sourcing. Let's talk about partner selection. This is also an important thing. So once you've got your geographies worked out, localized or globalized, single sourcing, multi-sourcing, etc., we can start to think about partners. Does your partner actually deal with the same compliance standards as you? So if you're a European company, and I am, a Danish company, we have very high compliance regulations on the suppliers that we work with in terms of manpower, overtime, all our code of conduct issues. So if our suppliers are not within that compliance and that gets audited by a third party and they're told to get, they're out of your network, overnight I have a risk on supply. So I invest a lot of money on auditing and pre-auditing all the partners that we work with to make sure our compliance standards or their compliance standards are the same as ours. The service level agreements, something that you need to talk with is, I mentioned before, TTS and TTR, right? Do they want to engage with this in your service levels towards you when you're doing purchasing? The cost of delivery or forecast risk, are they willing to invest with you a little bit as well? So when things go outside of standard, are they there with you as a partner, or are they just there as a supplier that don't want to contribute to the supply chain that you're setting up? Performance management, also very important. I think we saw before as well that you've got to have the tough conversations with your suppliers if they're not performing the way that you want them, rather than waiting for the bad performance to cause a risk of supply or a disruption in supply. So get your KPIs set with your suppliers, your service level agreements set with your suppliers, and manage them properly and have those difficult conversations. Fake news is no good, so win-win for the supplier and for you, and then you end up with a very visible supply chain or you have enough data there in your KPIs to make sure that you know where your risk is coming from before it happens. The last one here, relationship management. I was actually talking to Raymond on the way to the Philippines about relationship management and how much important role it plays. So I've got two examples here. This also relates to service levels and performance management. So BASF, our sole material company, they provide all the material that goes into every single one of our shoes. And we have a very fixed tank farm supply chain between China and Indonesia, which is our biggest shoe factory. At the start of COVID, this got very disrupted. We couldn't get our containers in or out of Nanjing in China. And so instead of just accepting that and having to try to find a different source, we worked with BASF and we added another 3, 4, I think 5 tanks in the end, which cost a lot of money. And they absorbed that cost based on the relationship that we've had for 20 years as a supplier and a customer. So this does matter. The other one, if we go into a commoditized supply chain, which is logistics, Scan Global, which is another Danish company, a smaller logistics 3PL. We've partnered with them for a very long time. We've invested in them and getting their setup done. We've had some good relationships with them. When COVID hit and containers got very scarce, we got to the front of the queue on the space on vessels because Scan Global gave us the first option from those years of work we've put in with them already. So relationship management does matter also in your risk profile. If you just jump around from supplier to supplier and you're just trying to go for the lowest cost, things are going to get very, very hard. And that sort of brings me into this sort of risk versus reward sort of summary. So what do you value? What's your North Star in your company? What's your enterprise strategy? If it's cost, I need to be the cheapest, you're probably going to get exposed to a lot of risk because you're going to run your supply chain very lean. When an external disruption comes in, you're going to have an impact. Or is it value? Right? So, and when I'm talking value, it's a little bit more like ECCO. Maybe we're not paying the cheapest cost. Maybe we're investing in a multi-source setup. Maybe we're trying to avoid we're trying to see disruption before it comes with our suppliers through performance management. And therefore, that investment, that policy premium that we're paying as an insurance company or an insurance broker is going to pay off when the disruption comes. Speed versus agility is kind of the same thing, but you can kind of have both. It depends on the company you're working in. But normally speed means low or high inventory, which is an investment. But if you have all your inventory in one area and something is disrupted in that area, then you run out really quickly. So agility is about balancing your inventory around your raw materials or your saleable goods. The other one is short-term versus long-term, right? If your North Star in your enterprise is to be short-term, then you're going to get disrupted when you have an event happen, and your risk management policy is going to be very, very, very limited in what you can do. But your premium will be low. It's a little bit more long-term, then you're going to invest, you're going to get that commitment from your enterprise, and when a disruption comes, that little bit of premium that you paid higher should mitigate a lot of the risk that you have. So I'll leave you this question at the end, and I'll thank you for your time and concentration at the last time today. What is your insurance premium when you look at your supply chain risk in your enterprise? If you can go away and think about that, then you'll be able to start to map out what you can do about it.